From the National Catholic Register, this is Register Radio, bringing light and clarity to the news and topics that affect your life.
As a clergy sex abuse scandal remains in the minds and hearts of Catholics all over the world, many wise voices are starting to speak out. What caused the crisis we face today, and what can we do to fix it? This week on Register Radio, we talked to one of the Register's most popular writers for his thoughts, part of the National Catholic Register's ongoing coverage of this important moment in the life of the Church. I'm Matthew Bunson, Register Senior Editor and co-host for Register Radio. My co-host, Jeanette DeMelo, Editor-in-Chief of the National Catholic Register, is off this week. Our guest this week, Msgr. Charles Pope, is a priest of the Archdiocese of Washington and a very frequent and popular contributor to the National Catholic Register. He recently wrote a blog post entitled, "Active Homosexuality in the Priesthood Helped Cause This Crisis." He wrote in part, "The Sixth Commandment is clear. There is a universal call to chastity, and no one is exempt. There are no separate rules for heterosexuals or homosexuals. There is to be no sexual intercourse or touching outside of valid marriage." And this, of course, leads to the most avoided topic related to this whole scandal, the problem of active homosexuality in the priesthood. An honest discussion, he writes, of this current crisis cannot avoid addressing the issue, shouts of homophobia, intolerance, bigotry, and scapegoating notwithstanding. It is evident that the vast majority of the cases involving both the sexual abuse of minors and of adults involve male victims. The 2004 John Jay report, The Nature and Scope of the Problem of Sexual Abuse of Minors by Catholic Priests and Deacons in the United States, which was commissioned by the U.S. bishops themselves, found that 81% of the victims were male, and 78% of all victims were post-pubescent. In summary, he concludes the large majority of the cases involve sexual misbehavior by priests with same-sex attraction. Well, that's a rather controversial view, and it's an important one for us to discuss. I interviewed Msgr. Pope here in the studios in Washington, D.C. I started by asking him exactly the impact of all of this on his own parish. Msgr., welcome.
Good to be here, thanks.
This is a scandal, a sex abuse scandal, that seems to touch everyone in the Church, and even far beyond the confines of Catholicism.
It does, and as I say, I think everyone has a very common human reaction to it, and we're angered, we're dismayed. You know, you keep thinking, well, this has been cleared up, and then come to find out there's huge gaps still, that the bishops, no one was watching the bishops, and then likewise we still find some struggles in some of our seminaries. That we have several investigations going on now, even in a place like Wichita that we thought would be wholly free. There's trouble going on there, and so it's a dismay that people have, sorrow, and you know, to me also a lot of anger that any of my brother priests would misbehave in these ways.
Mm-hmm. And how are your brother priests dealing with this, and you yourself? I know that you'd be the first to say it's not about me, but for you, this is a cross to bear as a good and faithful priest.
It is. You know, I suppose if there was ever a time that I took pride in wearing my clerics in a sinful way, God has certainly taken that away. And as I walk up and down the street now, I feel almost a little embarrassed. And so I say, well, Lord, I'm going to take the humiliation. I'm going to take the humility. I'm going to offer it up because I think it's just... It is just so angering to some of us priests who've tried so hard to live faithfully that some of our brothers besmirch all of our reputations. And it's not, again, just about our reputations. There's victims, people have been hurt, and this just angers and upsets us. You know, you want to kind of, almost like a father, you know, any good father, I mean, I'm saying this allegorically, of course, but if his daughter has been hurt by a neighborhood boy, he wants to grab his shotgun, you know, and a lot of us have that kind of anger. Let's go get these guys. Let's put them out. I mean, these are our children too. I mean, we're called spiritual fathers, and even if some of them are close to us in age, there's this fatherly care we have for our flock, and it's just so offensive to me that some fathers would turn on their own children in a kind of a spiritual incest.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
And what are you hearing from your own parishioners, your own flock?
Yeah. Again, the same anger and dismay, but I will say this, and I was able to say this to them on Sunday. I'm so grateful for your faith that you came today in spite of hearing all these things, and somewhere in all of this, you can still find Jesus. And one of the images of the church I gave them, we think of these images like the church is the body of Christ, the bride of Christ. We think of these beautiful exaltant images, but there's another biblical image of the church as Christ crucified between two thieves. And I said, I think that's kind of what we feel like, and it's hard to find Christ on this terrible hill of Golgotha right now, but this is where he is, and I'm so glad. And I just said to them, I'm so grateful for your faith, so grateful. And I'm angry with you, but together we've come to find Jesus.
And you wonder which thief you want to be.
Yeah, try to be the good thief who stole paradise.
That anger is directed at priests, I know. I'm sure you you feel that anger at times. Mm-hmm. But this second round, so to speak, is really more and more focused on our bishops, on our shepherds. Yeah. Is that what you're hearing?
It is, and there's a sense, I think, that people said, what do you mean the bishops were exempted? It's a little bit like a lot of our politicians who pass laws and they exempt Congress from following them. It's very angering to people, and to think that so much of this has been allowed, and it strains credibility for most people to think, well, nobody really knew about what Theodore Cardinal McCarrick was doing. I think that a lot of people knew. Now, I think it's fair to say that maybe they didn't have anything they could act on legally, but that doesn't. The church shouldn't wait for that. We should be self-correcting. And if I hear rumors about a brother priest that are consistent, I'm going to go and say, my brother, what's going on? What am I hearing? And if I really think there's something to it, then I have an obligation to, point it out to higher authorities. Mm-hmm. Why that didn't go on? Well, we know there's canonical problems. Well, fix canon law then. And we as I say, it's a sense of betrayal and a sense that if the shepherds aren't at the helm, who is?
Yeah, and finding those solutions, as you note, there are canonical questions, there are even theological questions, because the bishops, in the end, are answerable to the Holy Father. Yes. As a successor to the apostles, that it is the Holy Father's task to fix this. So if you were called in and asked to give your advice on a couple of things that need to happen to fix this now, what would that advice be?
Well, again, I don't know all the canon law either. That's not my expertise. But I would say that it's unrealistic to expect. I think the Pope's probably sitting down to pasta about now in Rome. And, he's 6,000 miles away. That's not realistic. I would recommend something similar to what we have at the diocesan level. We have deans who are usually the bishop will have about maybe, depending on the size of the diocese, a dozen to 25 priests who oversee a certain number of parishes. And it's our job to sort of check in, to feel any complaints, to make sure that the books and the records are being kept, to interview the staff once a year. And I would recommend something like that for bishops. I think that there needs to be the older system. I think the older code had something called metropolitans or archbishops who oversaw suffragan sees.
Well, it's still there,
technically,
in
but
the system,
it's been, what do you call it? All the real oversight's been rooted. It's more ceremonial now, and
right.
So I don't know. I think the canonists need to really look to this, and there should be some more local oversight. And certainly they work with the nuncio, and then of course ultimately Rome.
Yeah. And it looks more and more as though some sort of a Vatican investigation and apostolic visitation is likely to happen. Mm-hmm. Are you hearing from your parishioners and Catholics that you talk to, because I know you talk to Catholics of a wide variety, that there is now this expectation that at the end of the day there have to be resignations and serious changes made? Yeah,
and I have very mixed feelings about quick or sudden resignations. I know a lot of people who call for Cardinal World to resign. I want to say he's a good administrator. There are certainly gaffes that were pointed out in that grand jury report, but I think he could also be part of the solution. I think, though, that what we'd want to do, I think, is have a more of a forensic examination. If there really are bishops who really did handle this poorly, I don't know if I think, for example, we've heard about Cardinal O'Malley, who had received some information and said, well, that's not in my purview. And I'm like, well, those things should be, who really should have been overseeing this and calling it to somebody's attention? And if we find out really clearly who that should have been, I think, yes, certainly they should resign. Now, that's going to take time. I think people want instant action, but that's a typically American and modern. It's going to be a little slower. I think we should be fair and just.
Right. And there's a temptation to deal with a problem quickly so it goes away. But as we discovered with the Dallas Charter, there was something missing from that, and we're paying the consequences for it now.
We most certainly are. And
so any investigation, any work towards solutions must inevitably try to get at root causes. And what would you say are some of the root causes of this crisis?
Yeah, I think, first of all, we do want to say that there is a kind of a struggle we have in the church to find a balance between what we might call honest confidentiality. That's really needed in the church. We can't just be blabbing everybody's sins. That's not, our nature is to receive sinners and confidently. That's obviously under the confession. That's absolute. But even in more, open settings like counseling and so on, there's a professional discretion. We don't have that balance right, though, with times where we need to simply say, look, clerical secrecy and protecting the institution at all costs, and we don't want to open ourselves to a possible lawsuit here. Well, at the end of the day, it shouldn't take threats of lawsuits. It eventually comes back to us, and now the threats of the lawsuits are far greater. So we have little fears in the short run that just mount up in the long run. This idea of protecting the institution or protecting a certain bishop or what at all cost is getting very costly. So that's the first thing. I think also, though, and as I wrote recently in the Register, I think if we're going to have an honest conversation about this, we have just simply got to get out and talk about the problem of active homosexuality and a kind of a homosexual subculture that's been going on in the churches and in the seminaries for too long now. And it's created in the seminary system, and then it comes out from there, kind of, as I say, a subculture. And again, let's be clear, most homosexuals do not offend in this way, whether as pedophiles or ephebophiles, but we do have to accept the fact that 81% of the cases of offenses against minors were actually we had male victims, and all the victims in total, almost 80% of them were post-pubescent. We're not dealing with real pedophilia. We're dealing with what some call ephebophilia, but whatever the term, it's clearly a homosexual attraction to young men. And there are, again, a certain number of heterosexual priests who have offended against younger girls, but it's much smaller.
And
why is the number?
Well, and for the record, to your point, that was made very clear in the John Jay Report, which is the most comprehensive study in the history of American Catholicism in 2004. Yeah. And it has even been confirmed again in all of the individual state reports that we've seen. Yeah. So you're absolutely right statistically.
Yeah, statistically. Yeah. So, and I say, well, why is there such a high correlation, you see, with homosexuality and this type of offense? And I think, I'm not here to give all the answers, but I think it's just not honest, or it's not going to be a credible conversation until we allow that to be discussed. And right now, it's been, you can't even bring that up. All these charges of homophobia, or you're scapegoating, or bigotry. Well, but there's an honest statistic to look at here and get to the bottom of it. And I'm not saying I have all the answers, but there's a definite correlation. And you say, well, correlation is not causation. Well, I think in this case we need to rule that out. I think, again, let's be clear, most do not engage, most men and, who are heterosexual, homosexual don't. But there's a much higher incidence, and there's a reason for that. And I think part of it goes to seminary formation. When you put a man with same-sex attraction in an all-male environment, and there's going to be maybe a few others there, and they begin to link up, and the temptation, if I was an all-female dormitory, growing up and going through college or seminary, sharing shower facilities, and that's going to take heroic virtue to not offend. And then, especially if a couple of the girls start to wink at me and signal they might be willing. So I think it starts there. And I'm not here to – I think we have to have some sympathy for people who have same-sex attraction and to say that's just simply not the environment they should be in. And that's church policy in the last, 20 years or so has been pretty clear about that, that we shouldn't admit people with deep-seated homosexual inclinations into the seminary, and not all places have followed that norm.
And Pope Francis himself has reiterated that on a number of occasions, just a couple of months ago.
He has. It was very underreported, I think because it doesn't fit the narrative some people want to create about him. But I think he was quite clear that if this is noted, we cannot admit them for their own sake as well as for the seminary.
When we come back, I continue my conversation with Monsignor Charles Pope on his blog post relating to homosexuals in the priesthood. This is Register Radio.
Have you heard who's reading the Register? Why, it's Tim Staples.
The National Catholic Register gives you the world's news like no other. Only NCR has a stable of writers steeped in good Catholic theology and philosophy to give you the news with proper perspective.
For a 3-month free subscription to the National Catholic Register, go to ncregister.com and click on the 3 months free banner or call 1-800-421-3230.
Let's return to Register Radio on EWTN.
Welcome back to Register Radio. I'm Matthew Bunson, Senior Editor of the National Catholic Register and co-host of Register Radio. Jeanette DeMelo, Editor-in-Chief of the National Catholic Register, is off this week. I continue my interview with Monsignor Charles Pope, looking at the sex abuse crisis in his recent blog post, Active Homosexuality in the Priesthood Helped Cause This Crisis. One of the key points that Monsignor was trying to make is that, as he put it, the Sixth Commandment is clear. There is a universal call to chastity, and no one is exempt. He also made another rather important point. So you also, in your wildly well-received piece, I should add, on this very question of homosexuality in the priesthood, stress that we actually have a policy already in place to deal with this. And it's a very simple one called the Sixth Commandment.
The Sixth Commandment, yeah. You know, I don't know why, but we've come to a place in our culture where a lot of people just wink at the Sixth Commandment and say, well, you know, people are weak, boys will be boys. And likewise, there's a lot of people today who think that people with same-sex attraction somehow get a pass, or there should be a different commandment for them. There's not a commandment 6.5, or there's no little clause where every single human person is called to chastity across the board. And for a married couple, that means complete fidelity of mind and heart and body. And for all of us who are unmarried, no genital sexual contact with anyone ever under any circumstances. It's just simply not to be done. I don't know why we want to complicate it. It's very simple. Now, it's hard for people, but at some level, it's freeing. I'm 30 years a priest, and I can say, as God is my witness, 30 years I've been under the oath or the vow of celibacy, and I've never been inappropriate with anybody, ever, not even once, as God is my witness. And I think that, you know, it's possible to live this way, and many people do. And by the way, most of my brother priests could say that too. Most of them have been very faithful, so I'm concerned that this so besmirches the priesthood, and there's a lot, they say they live celibately, There's no alternate plan for anybody. It's just, and this is, by the way, at the heart of dignity. I mean, why should I say to a person with same-sex attraction, well, you know, you're not up to it. Don't worry. You know, it's kind of the tyranny of low expectations again. No. I mean, I know in my parish a number of people with same-sex attraction who live beautifully chaste lives, and they're committed to the church teaching. And so I think this idea that homosexuality or same-sex attraction should, you know, there's a different commandment, or that's actually a reduction of their dignity.
And for a young man who is encountering same-sex attraction, what advice do you give him? Or a young woman who's encountering the same thing in terms of same-sex attraction?
You know, the Catechism actually has something to say about that. It talks about disinterested friendships. Now, people say, what kind of a friendship is that? You know, but we've lost the concept in our culture. I think friendship is on holiday. You know, deep friendships that are chaste and that are where people share and they you know, I say I have about 5 or 6 priest buddies. Those guys know everything about me. You know what I mean? You know, and here he goes again. I know what he's going to say. I know what they're going to order at the restaurant. You know, etc. But good, healthy friendships, I think, are very enriching. And in a way, the philosophers always said that friendship is, in a certain sense, the highest love, in the sense that we so idolize sexuality and romanticism in our culture, but really, even, you know, most people who are married more than 6 minutes know there's a lot of tensions in marriage, and sometimes one can find a friend and even talk through some of those. But it's a beautiful love, don't get me wrong, but I think at some point we become so fixated on the sexuality and romance and so on in our culture that we've forgotten that friendship is a very, very satisfying aspect of life. And I think the Catechism certainly cultivates it, obviously, to stay away from a lot of the gay subculture that sort of celebrates what should not be celebrated. That's important. And then finally, I would say, again, good support groups like Courage and so on are important.
Well, while I have you, I know a lot of our listeners and our readers would be very interested in knowing a little bit more about you, because you are one of the favorite authors for the National Catholic Register. So I think they'd love to know a little bit about your background.
That surprises me that I'm one of the favorites. There's so many good folks at the Register. I figure I'm among the also-rans. I was born in 1961 in Chicago in St. Francis Hospital, and I was baptized the same day I was born because I wasn't supposed to make it, but here I am. And I had, some kind of a blood-borne thing that, RH factor, whatever they called it. So I was baptized that day, but I did obviously make it. I grew up in Chicago, came to the D.C. area in 1972. My father had come back from Vietnam, and we settled in the D.C. area, part of his military career. And I have 3 siblings, 2 brothers. My sister passed away a long time ago now, in 1990. She had mental illness, and she was always, sort of just a very special member of our family, but she did die in 1990. I have 2 other brothers. One lives in Florida. The other lives in Seattle. The one in Seattle has 9 kids, and the one in Florida has 3. So I got a good dozen nieces and nephews. And I studied at George Mason University here in the D.C. area. I got a computer science degree, and then I went to Mount St. Mary's from there. And I came sort of close to getting married, but for various reasons, the Lord called me in a different direction.
Yeah, and your seminary experience. All priests now, I guess, are being asked, what did you see in the seminary, and were there problems when you went?
Well, I would say Mount St. Mary's, where I went in Emmitsburg, had a relatively cleaner reputation, but there were certainly in the 80s a lot of seminaries with really bad reputations, and I don't want to repeat some of the things they were called, but I'll just say that I think at the Mount, if we did have any, it wasn't nearly as magnified. And generally, I would say if there were a couple who were found, a couple of young men or, several men who were struggling with that and they weren't living chastely, they were asked to leave. So I think the Mount was pretty solid in those days, but I certainly know many other seminaries that had very different reputations, and it just went on too long. And as you know, there was a kind of in the early 90s, there was an examination of all the seminaries and some house cleaning.
And what descriptives would you use for seminary system today? What are its strengths and what are some of its weaknesses? I mean, clearly this scandal has exposed some potential problems that we hope are mostly in the past. Yeah. But going forward, this has to be a major issue.
Yeah. I think that there's so many things are better with the seminary system than when I went through. I think that investigation and also the publication of the catechism had a huge effect on kind of settling theology down. Solid doctrinal teaching is essential, right? And then, of course, proper, observation that men can live chaste, both heterosexual and homosexual, that they're able to live chastely, and but again, good insistence on solid doctrine, and insisting that men live very chastely, and if they're struggling, to be honest with that. And there are going to be some men who go to the seminary and discover, this isn't for me for various reasons, and part of that should be whether they're able to live chastely, not just among other men, but how they behave when they're in parishes. Because again, heterosexual men struggle with chastity too, and obviously too, we haven't really talked about this, but pornography and self abuse, masturbation, all those things are things that even those who live very chastely can still struggle with from time to time. So a lot of mercy, but again, if these become very deep seated, all those things are factors that need to be, a man needs to honestly assess, is celibacy something that I'm called to?
And the question is often asked now is what some advance as a potential solution to this sex abuse crisis is getting rid of celibacy. Where do you stand in that?
Well, I'm a confessor, and I hear lots of confessions of all kinds of men and women. I'm going to tell you, marriage and isn't always a problem. Many married men still struggle with pornography and masturbation, and they're unfaithful at times. And these are things that I'm not saying this is so widespread. I don't want to start a new scandal, but I'm saying that it's a human problem. Right. And as I say, I've never acted out or any of those things, and I won't say I never had a dirty thought or never saw a bad picture, but I'm going to just say I've been able to be faithful. I've never been inappropriate with anyone. In 30-some years now of ordained ministry. And so it's very possible to live this way. And it's a beautiful, in a way, it's easier to completely abstain than to moderate. And if a priest is, just careful with his boundaries and so on, I think most of us do live this well. And so many other priests could say the same thing.
Yeah. Well, Monsignor Pope, I'm so grateful for your time.
Good to be here. Thank you, Matthew.
Keep writing for the Register.
All right. Thank you.
God bless. Renewed thanks to Monsignor Charles Pope for his time. To find his post and for more news, analysis, and commentary, check out the National Catholic Register online at ncregister.com. Also, be sure to listen to our weekly podcast. Thanks so much for joining us here on Register Radio, here on EWTN. Keep praying for all of our priests and bishops. For Jeanette DeMelo and our producer, Jeff Burson, I'm Matthew Bunson. Until next week, God bless.